The wonderful thing about After Effects is its modular design. Now, I've broken down the application into 6 core foundations. Once you understand these foundations, you'll be able to work in After Effects regardless of your job function. Whether you're a motion graphics person or if you specialize in visual effects, as long as you understand these 6 foundations, you'll be in a good spot. Now, we'll review these foundations in no particular order because they don't have a particular hierarchy. They all sort of rate the same. Let's get started by looking at our compositions. When we go to the project panel in the AAA Output Comps folder, I have 2 different compositions. Compositions are containers. Any of your graphics that you create inside of After Effects will be created inside of a composition. And as you can see in this project, you can have more than one composition inside of an After Effects project, similar to sequences in a Premiere Pro project. When you double-click a composition, it opens the comp in the composition panel and in the timeline. And in the timeline, we have layers. Layers are our next foundation. They control the scene 2 ways. First way, they control it vertically. And this works like layer hierarchy inside of Photoshop. Whatever layers on top will be seen in your composition panel, and whatever layers on the bottom will be obstructed by the layers on top. Sometimes it works slightly differently in 3D, but we'll get to that in a moment. Now, the second way that layers work is horizontally. Horizontally, they control time. So for example, if I scrub through this project, you can see when layer 3 ends, these lines are going to disappear. So you can control whether an object appears or disappears in the scene by making adjustments in the timeline. Since we're talking about the timeline, let's talk about animation. Animation is our next foundation. I'm going to go back to my training swoosh comp. In here, I'll just select a couple layers and click on one and shift click on the other. If you press the U key, that'll open up any animated parameters for those layers. Now, animations are primarily driven by keyframes inside of After Effects. And there are different kinds of keyframes that will control how an object moves through an animation or through the scene. Now let's jump back to our 3D logo composition. In here, we have effects on layers. So let's select layer 2, our multipass layer. If I turn the effect off by clicking the effects option here, notice the shadow disappears from the background. I'll go ahead and turn it off and turn it back on again. This shadow is generated by an effect. You can use effects to control all kinds of things in After Effects. You can generate shadows, you can stylize footage, you can do any number of things. Now, another foundation is 3D. In After Effects, you can have true 3D layers made possible by Cinema 4D. You can have 2.5D layers, which are flat layers that move in 3D space, or you can just have flat 2D layers. But 3D in and of itself is definitely one of the foundations of After Effects. Then, of course, when you're finished, another very important foundation, rendering. Rendering is controlled by the render queue in After Effects. So I'm going to go up under my composition here and add my project to the render queue. In the render queue, you can determine exactly what kind of file is output. I could output a TIFF sequence or a QuickTime file. There are many different render settings dependent upon what your end use for your video is going to be. Those are all controlled through the render queue. So that pretty much winds up our 6 foundations of After Effects. Now, I realize that was a fast tour, but this is another situation where we have to lay the foundations of understanding as we continue through the process of getting started with After Effects.